Aloha, this is Ed in Hawaii. In this video, I want to talk about overland movement. The adventurers are walking across the country. And when I look in the core rule book, it doesn't really explain with maps how really this happens. So I thought I'd devote a little kind of tutorial video on how to do overland travel, traveling across country for the adventurers. So let me get started. Here we see a map. On the map you have your mountains, your plains, your forests, your hills, your coastline, roads and trails, and all kinds of stuff. And you want the adventurers to travel across this land. So let's go ahead and look at how this is done. Okay, let's have some adventurers. Our adventurers start here, where you see that little blue star. And they leave a cave in these little hills up there off to the right on the map. And they intend to go to the Pyre, which is all the way over there on the coast. So, what did they do? Well, now I have seen a game master bypass the journey altogether and say something like, you travel for 5 days and arrive at the Pyre, just to get the next encounter going. And I don't like that. You miss that whole journey from one point to the other. There's so many things that can happen. So I want to say that the journeys between encounters are a special part of any story and add flavor to the land and the people in between. Because you look at that map, there's all kinds of places in that land. And think of all the people and beings that live there. So you're going to travel through that. And you can actually make it an interesting experience. So how do the adventurers journey to the Pyre in a way that is fun and yet efficient for the flow of the game? Because if the next encounter, the next true encounter is going to be over at the Pyre, you just got to get over there. You could make it really fast, but that's going to miss the journey. That's going to miss the enjoyment of the journey. All right. Or you can take your time and do this. We put a grid pattern onto the map. This breaks up the journey into bite-sized pieces. You can see that each square is a part of the journey. So each little section of the land becomes a square. So all you have to do is describe what is in that square, and then they can move on to the next square. That's basically the idea here. All right. Now you can see here on this map that 10 squares is equal to 50 miles. Well, that means that 20 squares is equal to 100 miles. So with the grid pattern, the journey is broken up into pieces by each square, and the adventurers travel from square to square. You can make the grid pattern as small or as big as you want, depending on how detailed you want the journey. I recommend 3 to 5 squares per an average day's travel. That's about 5 miles per square, considering trackless terrain and forests and jungles. So if you're going in some parts of the map, you travel very quickly, some parts you travel very slow. On average, you should do about 5 miles per square. And that will give you about 3 to 5 squares of travel per day. Just kind of a round estimate. You might find that your terrain you go through the terrain very fast, and you can change the number of miles per square. Now, if the adventurers walk unencumbered on trails, straight for 100 miles, that would be from that cave where the blue star is to the Pyre. They would take them a little more than 4 days to arrive. That's 24 miles per day. But the trails aren't straight, and they'll have to cross or go around mountains, forests, rivers, and maybe even kingdom borders. The journey will be longer than 5 days for sure. Now, if 10 squares is 50 miles, then each square is 5 miles, or about 1.5 hours walking. But if they walk through a forest without a trail, each square takes double the time. That's 3 hours. That means that it will take a day, 3 forest squares, just to leave the forest where the cave is. You can see that on the right, where the arrows are leaving the forest. As they go, it takes 3 hours to go through each of those 4 squares. So if they go through 2.5 of those, that's about an 8-hour day. So if they leave the cave in the morning, say at 8 o'clock, by the end of the day, they're camping on the edge of the forest. It takes one day to get out of that forest and then camp for the night. But the squares don't just measure hours. They also give a snapshot of that area. Okay, what does this mean? You, the GM, can describe a scene in any square. The weather, the plants, the landscape, buildings, and what people are doing. Some ideas. Here are some ideas. You enter a square and you can see a passing gypsy caravan, or a monk temple, or a farm with aromatic flowers, or a mountain view of a valley sunset, or a lightning storm, a stampede, a distant forest fire, a collapsed bridge, ghost-haunted hills. Or you might even encounter an ambush when you walk into one of these squares. So, how do the adventurers move through a grid pattern? One square at a time, of course. But I have a house rule. They cannot move diagonally 2 times in a row. I do that just because if there are 2 teams racing to a certain point, and one team is going diagonally and one team is going straight up, they'll reach the spot at the same place, at the same time, I mean, but one is obviously starting farther away. So that's my rule. You can only move 1 square at a time, but you can't move diagonally 2 in a row. So you can see in the above example that the adventurers head toward the road along the coast, but they don't move diagonally 2 times in a row. And all these arrows, the red arrows you see there, accumulate to about 3 days worth of travel. Now, as the adventurers move through a square, you, the GM, do certain things. You can describe the weather, the landscape, the scenery, the terrain they walk on, and the time of day. So this is, in each square, you just have this brief synopsis of what they find in that square. But you also make a note if they have eaten or taken fluids. This is important because if they're not drinking fluids and they're not eating, they start to go through starvation and thirst, and that starts to affect their survival, and they have to start doing survival checks and things like that. But then as they start to move through the square, you describe buildings, people, and any changes along the way. So you can actually just make one square as like a little photo, a little snapshot of the world. You describe it, and then you walk through it. And then you get to the next square, you describe it, you walk through it. And that way you can actually go across country 1 square at a time in an organized fashion. Now, I want to give an example of this. As for example, in square D20 up above, you can describe a hot, dry afternoon as they leave some barren, hard-pan hills, and then walk across a grassy desert with butterflies to find the road. So when you look at that little square D20, you can actually see that they're walking out of some hills, then they walk a little ways across a grassy meadow and onto the road. You can also prepare some non-relevant events in specific squares to give flavor to the world. You might place a secluded monastery on the coast at B13. You might place a recent shipwreck on the coast at A9. You might have a ghost attack during their night's sleep at E22. You might place an apple farm at C12 with great apple pie. You get this whole gamut of different things that you can add in to this journey across the land that have nothing to do with the adventurer's story, but they just add flavor to the land and the people. So if at any point along the journey a tactical scene arises, draw up a tactical combat map of the immediate area and then go for it. So here you see that I took the grid pattern off here, so you can just see that this is their path that they're walking along through the forest and through those hills and then along the road, trying to get to the pyre. So now, when you look at the map of this world, it's not just a map. Now you see ghosts, butterflies, monks, a gypsy caravan, and great apple pie. And these are the little memories that make a journey special. Okay, that'll do it for this video on overland travel. Aloha, and see you next time. And above all, get wisdom.